from Playmates.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Sounds weird, but this was my life when I was a little kid. Especially the Playmates toy line that started in 1988 and ran into the 90s. This toy line brought me so much more joy than I can remember. So, while the toys have been reviewed to death online by this point, I'll still review them myself, but I figured I'd tell you my personal stories that go along with the memories of these figures, because a lot of these figures, they have important things connected to them for me personally, and I figured what better way to explain why I love something so much than to tell you. So, without further ado, let's start looking at some Turtles figures. And what better figure to start with than not only the leader of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but also the first action figure I ever got for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles line, which also happened to be my introduction to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles brand, Leonardo. Now, as far as the Turtles go, Leonardo is actually my least favorite of the four. Not saying I dislike him. I love all the Turtles. They're awesome characters. Way up there, just on the list of fictional characters. I love all four of them. But of the four Turtles, he was always kind of my least favorite as a kid. He just seemed a little boring compared to the other ones. Raph had the whole, edgy attitude. Michelangelo was the fun, cool, hip party dude that you wanted to, hang out with. You wished he was your friend. And Donatello was kind of the most useful of the Turtles when you actually look back on most things Turtles. He's pretty much just as good at ninjutsu as the rest of them, but then on top of that, he's like an impossibly smart genius who can invent any kind of reality bending machine to save the day whenever we need one. So Leonardo was just kind of the one who's he's the most serious about his training. He's kind of a goody two-shoes, and he's the most loyal to Splinter. But he didn't have a whole lot of personality in a lot of the different versions. Obviously the 1990 movie, he had a lot more personality. For the most part, I wasn't as interested in him. And even over the years, in the Michael Bay movies and stuff, there have been a lot of occurrences where they kind of almost make Leonardo kind of a jerk at some times. But I don't know. In general, I do like Leonardo. I think he's an awesome character. But he does have a special significance for me because, as I said before, this was the first action figure from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles line I ever got. And this was the first time I ever heard of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I had no idea what this was until I got it. It was my birthday. I think I turned 3. It was the late 80s. And I opened this package, and here was this awesome looking card back. It's this amazing looking package of just, the sewer brick wall and this cool figure of this inhuman character with these bright colors and everything. And it was an immediately awesome figure. I just instantly thought it was cool. And I was instantly interested in what this brand was. Before I could even process it, my older brother was like, "Whoa, you got a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. These are the new cool thing. Everyone at school loves them and stuff." So I instantly felt like the man. Because, prior to that, my brother always had the main characters in the line. He had He-Man and Skeletor and all them. He had Lion-O. He always had the main character in the toy line. And I always got secondary characters. I had Panthro and Vulture Man, I think, for Thundercats. It was pretty cool for me to suddenly be the one to get the new cool toy first. And boy, did getting this figure just really open the door to what my life would mostly revolve around for the next, I don't even know, 4 or 5 years of my life. I mean, at that age, from about 1989 to probably about 1993, my life was just mostly Ninja Turtles. There was, Nintendo Entertainment System, Ninja Turtles, dinosaurs, and everything else. This figure, though, I remember specifically early on, once I got this figure, we started to, watch the cartoon then, and start to learn about the characters and want to collect more. Because one of my earliest memories of playing with this figure was, at the time I only had Leonardo, so I wanted more characters because I was watching the cartoon, I was starting to learn who they were. So I took one of my sister's Barbie dolls, because we didn't have any of the other Turtles characters, and I pretended it was April O'Neil, and I had them like go on like an adventure together. And yeah, I was like one of the first things I remember doing with this figure. Probably the strangest thing about this figure, though, is how I lost my original copy. So there came a point, a couple years later, we had moved into our bigger house that I grew up in. Originally, I was in a townhouse when I first got this Leonardo. We moved into this bigger house, probably about a year we were there. And me and my brother, we were like Turtle Mania then. We were obsessed with turtles by that point. We had a ton of them. And we were playing some game where we were sitting on the rec room couch and we were kind of like throwing Leonardo at the glass door to the backyard there. We were just kind of flinging him, like pelting the poor guy at the door over and over again. I don't remember what the game was or what the joke was, but we just kind of kept like throwing him like a frisbee at the door. And eventually there was like blue curtains hanging on the side of the door. And at some point when he banged into the door, he kind of flew off to the side. And we assumed he went into the blue curtains. That's where he kept going. But when we moved them, we couldn't find anything. And we looked all over that rec room, and we just couldn't find him. He wasn't under anything. He wasn't behind anything. He just like magically vanished. And I found that so weird. To date, I still don't know what happened. I'm assuming, obviously, he ended up somewhere. My mom was probably vacuuming or something, and he got caught in the vacuum, and she got angry and threw him out or something. Like, oh, look, they're just leaving their toys around. They don't even care about them or something. Like, probably something like that is what took place. But to this day, I still don't quite know what happened to my first Leonardo. Next up is Michelangelo, the party dude of the bunch. As a kid, Michelangelo was my favorite of the four turtles. He was just, he was the cool one. He skateboarded, he ate the most pizza, he said cowabunga the most, he talked like a dude. He was like, that 1980s surfer, Spicoli kind of dude. Like, that was just everyone's favorite kind of character at the time, like Bill and Ted and all of them. So, like, he was just the definition of cool and fun when I was a kid. But as I've gotten older, I still love Mike, but I don't like him as much. I'd say he's my third favorite turtle. He's just above Leonardo. And admittedly, when you go back and watch the 87 cartoon show, Michelangelo does get kind of annoying how much he talks about pizza. It's a little overdone. But anyway, this figure, which I've actually always loved the color combination on here. I've always really liked that sort of little more bluish, like jungle green kind of green for Michelangelo's skin that they used in the original series. Because, blue and orange are contrasting colors. And, while he's not actually blue, he has the more bluish hue in the green. So it just really makes the orange pop. And just this combination of colors just looks so cool. Like, when I first saw it, I just found it so appealing. I just couldn't stop, rotating the figure around and looking at all the details. And just the colors in these original Turtles toys are just classic to me, just instantly classic. They just look perfect together, like the skin tones and the color of the shell and that kind of mustard-colored belly that they have. It all looks really cool. Michelangelo I also got. It wasn't my brother's, which again felt kind of cool because not only did I get the leader, but I also got the most popular character among little boys at that time. Like, we all thought Mike was the coolest. I remember one day my father was coming home, I think from a business trip. It was like the middle of the day. It was weird because usually we only really got action figures on birthdays or Christmas, and rarely other times that we'd go to Toys R Us or something or KB and get one. But at this time, it was just randomly in the middle of the day. I was still living in the townhouse, so it was very early on. I think he was even the second figure I got from the line. And my dad just came home in a white delivery truck. She didn't work for him. He didn't work in that line. I don't know why he was in this white truck. I don't know what happened this day. Maybe the white truck was with him and he pulled up his car. I didn't see it, but I was just playing in the house, and then suddenly my dad came in and was like, "Hey guys, I got you some toys." And he gave me Michelangelo and he gave my brother Splinter. And yeah, I just remember thinking that the Michelangelo toy was so cool. I actually already liked him more than the Leonardo toy. I also do remember the Michelangelo toy was one of those first toys where I really started to enjoy that fresh toy smell. You know, when you just, I mean, new toys aren't quite like that. They're made out of a different plastic. These old Playmates toys, when you first opened that blister card on the front of the package and you pulled that figure out, there was just this smell to the plastic that was just so nice. It was like so refreshing. It's just such a nostalgic smell that's so hard to come by these days. But yeah, I just remember thinking that was so cool. Like, everything about that figure I just liked. It was just a good day. I think before I got the figure, I was playing with like color changing Hot Wheels. There was like Hot Wheels cars you could like dip in water and it would turn from, it was like a Ferrari that turns from blue to purple or something. I don't know. So even though Michelangelo was like my new favorite figure for quite a bit, he replaced Leonardo, we started to get characters more rapidly. We started getting crazier characters and more characters. So while I still always loved the Michelangelo figure, and it always had a special place in my heart, it soon got kind of phased out by a lot of other figures. So yeah, I still think Michelangelo's fantastic, and I do believe he's the only turtle of the original 4. One of his legs is completely unique from the other ones. Every other turtle just shares one of the same 3 legs. So next up is Raphael. Raph is, it's hard to decide if he's my favorite turtle or not, actually, these days. It's kind of a mix between him and Don. I like both of them a lot. I think when I got back into Ninja Turtles, which was around 2006 or so, or, you know, I started missing them, I started rebuying all the figures again. At that time I said Raphael was my favorite, no question. But then once I got back into them, about a year later, I started to really appreciate Don, who I feel like I never really appreciated as a kid. Like I mentioned before, he's kind of the one who always saved the day, and I just kind of liked his personality too. I kind of liked that, you know, I liked him because, you know, he was different. He was a brainiac, but he wasn't like, you know, like Brainy Smurf, where he's like a jerk to everybody because he acts like he's above them. He would like poke fun at Michelangelo being slow every now and then, but Donatello was like, you know, he'd make corny jokes and kind of laugh at them, like in the movies and in the cartoon show, and he was kind of like, I don't know, he was humble and fun. I like Donatello. But anyway, back to Raph. Raph is just cool. While Leonardo is the leader, I think of Raph as being the main character. He's kind of like the face of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's kind of the one that usually I feel the watcher is supposed to relate to. And arguably all 3 of the original movies, Raph has the most character development, and the most story, and the most focus. And I think a lot of the appeal of Raph comes from the fact that he is flawed. So that makes him a little more relatable. Although in the original cartoon series, Raph was kind of just the smartass, you know, he was the wiseacre of the group. But this figure, of the 4 original Turtles figures, this one's probably the least memorable to me. I mean, he probably looks the most pissed. Like, he looks like a T-Rex or something. But, I don't know, I like the apple green with the red. It really pops. But I always found his green to be the most, like, ordinary and kind of boring of the group. Again, I still love it, but also this was my brother's first figure. My brother got Raph as his first Turtles figure, and this was the second one we got collectively. Like, I got Leonardo, and then he got Raph, because our collection was shared. Like, my toys were his toys, and his toys were my toys. So I don't particularly remember him obtaining this figure, but I do remember having it when we were kids. So I don't really have too many stories. I feel like we actually lost this figure pretty quick. Or we probably still had it for a while, but it wasn't very noteworthy. We never really did anything too noteworthy with it. The best thing I can say about the Raph figure when compared to the other Turtles of the first wave is he definitely stands the best. You know, they gave him 2 flat feet, and, you know, he stands more easily than the other Turtles with those action poses, those leaning feet they have. Though I do actually like the action poses. I'm all for just, like, pre-made cool poses on figures that don't, like, break up the sculpt too much. It's also interesting that Raph is the only one who gets a piece on the back to hold one of the other weapons, like one of the fist daggers or the, you know, spiked knuckles. And to finish up the 4 turtles, we're going to end with Donatello. As I've stated before, Don is probably my favorite turtle now. I didn't dislike him as a kid. I've always liked Donatello. But I do feel like he got overlooked a lot. He got the short end of the bow staff when I was a kid. So I think over time I've grown more of an appreciation for Don. But even that being said, as a kid, I still loved the design of his figure. The color scheme on him was always so cool. It always seemed like special from the other turtles. Because Don is pretty much not even green. He's more like a murky brown kind of color. And that always made him kind of stand out. I always liked him being brown. And even in modern iterations of the Turtles, like 2012 Nickelodeon cartoon and stuff, and the 2003 cartoon, when they do make the Turtles different colors, different shades of green, and even then they always make Don just green, like a yellowish green or a pale green. They really have never gone back and made Don brown ever again, and I've always liked him in brown much more. Like, it looked very cool. The brown and the purple, he has that very, like, cool, like, royal kind of purple, and he just has this, like, ferocious look on his face. Like, you don't mess with this Don. Like, look at him. Yeah, he's just an awesome figure. I think he's probably the coolest looking of the original 4 figures of the Turtles. I really like this figure. And this one was also my brother's. So even though I got the leader and the most popular and current favorite of mine as a kid, in the long run, my brother was the one who got my 2 favorite turtles. He got this, I believe, for his birthday, along with a few other characters. I believe he got Rocksteady and possibly even Baxter Stockman at the same time. The second wave was already out. And I do remember there was a significant, memorable moment with our Donatello figure, which we had it for a bit. I believe we got him back at some point later on. But we did lose this figure somewhat early, because one day my brother brought him into school. You know, he was gonna like play with him in the desk. They were those kind of desks that, you know, it's like a flat tabletop on top, and then, you know, underneath it's kind of like open, so you can put all your books in the desk, and there's a little tray to put your pencils. This is old style of desk, and we both went to the same school, but, you know, he was much older, about 3 years older than me. So anyway, I wasn't even in school yet, and I believe he was in the 2nd grade, and he brought Donatello to school and was playing with him in his desk, and, you know, there were some like real nasty teachers in that school, and one of them like saw him playing with the figure and took it away from him. They said, like, you can't have this in school, and she took the figure away, and she never gave it back. She just put it in like her drawer of toys she stole from kids she didn't like. But then when birthdays of kids that she did like came around, she would give them birthday presents, and guess what those birthday presents were? They were the figures that she stole from the kids she didn't like. So then the birthday kid would be allowed to have this toy in school and play with them because this was a kid they actually liked. They actually wouldn't even give out toys on every birthday. I'm not joking, it was really only for the kids they liked. So the next year, some other random kid ended up with our Donatello. So, farewell, Donnie. Hopefully he was in good hands. Alright, so now we're going to go on to the rest of the heroes. Splinter, their sensei and father figure, and April O'Neil, their human friend and connection to the outside world. So let's start with Splinter. To be totally honest, I'm not a huge fan of Splinter's action figure, and I never really was. He has a cloth kimono, and that alone I'm not a huge fan of. It was very easy for kids to lose this. Most of us did. We spent most of our childhoods with naked Splinters. And honestly, the kimono didn't even look nice. It was kind of just this big puffy pink thing. So it was weird. The belt on top of it usually made it like puff out. And without the kimono on, the toy looks kind of stupid. Because, you know, while while the turtles in Bebop and Rocksteady are, they're very anthropomorphic. They have human bodies, they're buff, they're menacing looking, they look cool. Like a kid sees that and they're like, oh, that's cool. Splinter kind of just looks like a big chubby rat. His body's kind of just, shaped like an egg. And then he just has this weird kind of squat head with no neck. He has this weird thing going on where he has pupils, but they didn't paint them. They painted the eyes all white. Because, in the original Eastman and Laird comic, his eyes were all white. He didn't have pupils. Same with the turtles. But while they kept that look for the turtles in the action figures, for some reason they sculpted Splinter with pupils. Which you don't even have to sculpt the pupil. I don't know what that was about. But they sculpted pupils, but then decided they didn't want pupils, so they just painted his eyes all white. His legs also just kind of look very animalistic. They're just kind of pudgy rat legs. And then he has these scrawny arms with kind of tiny hands where in the cartoon, the kimono is actually a kimono where it has sleeves. He has kind of long fingers with claws on them, so he actually has not only a more human body, but kind of the cool features of a rat are brought out more, whereas in the toy, he kind of just looks like a hamster with a long face. He's not a great figure, honestly. There's really no cool poses you can get with him. I'm just really not a fan of this Splinter, and my only real memories of this toy is just him always being naked at the bottom of the duffel bag that I had all my Turtles figures in. There was just always a naked rat on the bottom of my bag, and that was Splinter. And last, but let's be honest, least of the Heroes figures is April O'Neil. Now, to be totally honest, I didn't own April O'Neil as a kid. I had an older brother, and he was all about, girls drool and boys rule, that kind of stuff. A lot of boys weren't all for back in the 80s and 90s. Probably still are, I don't know. We never got April O'Neil, and to be honest, I never really had any interest in getting April O'Neil. The human characters who didn't fight always bored me in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I never, as a kid, wanted action figures of Irma or Burn Thompson or Vernon or... now when I watch the show, I actually love those characters. But as a kid, I just hated them. I just wanted to see mutants and cool stuff like that. So we didn't own April O'Neil as a kid. And to be honest, I'm actually glad we didn't. Because I got this figure in about 2006. And I have to say, this is the lamest action figure ever. This was a problem that happened a lot back in the day with old toy lines. Female characters either just didn't get figures at all, which was actually more common. Or when they did get figures, they were so lame. They usually had very awkward articulation, really thin limbs that were easy to break and just not fun to play with. Small hands, small feet, tiny heads. They just didn't look appealing, and they didn't feel nice in your hand. They didn't feel like the kind of thing you wanted to have fight or bash around with your other figures. You hold characters like Bebop and Rocksteady, and they're these big, chunky toys, He-Man figures. You could really just bash them into each other, the male ones. But, Teela and Evelyn were these, skinny, oddly articulated figures that just weren't fun to play with. The heads were very small, the hands were very small, the arms were in weird positions. I always wished that they just exaggerated the female characters a little more. Make their hands bigger, their feet a little bigger, beef them up a little bit, make their heads bigger, kind of give them cartoony proportions. Not crazy, they don't have to look like Mickey Mouse or something, but just, kind of match them with the male characters, because I always wished that female characters had, beefier, chunkier figures that you could, they felt nice in your hand and you could make them battle and be rough with them just like the male figures. Because female figures, they always seemed so bent on just making them pretty, realistically pretty, that it just ended up being a boring toy usually. So I would have preferred if they just, made her head a little bigger, gave her a bit more of an expressive face, Made her a little bit thicker, bigger hands, bigger feet. So she was like fun to play with. Because this figure stinks. You have this awkward arm that just stretches out that honestly Tila and Evelyn had in their sculpts also in He-Man. She has this weird swivel at her waist. It's just awkward. It's kind of loose on my figure. She's just so skinny. Her head is really small. Like, it looks weird. You put her next to Shredder, who's a human being also, and he looks like in one gulp he could eat her head. Like, his head is so much bigger than hers. It looks really weird. It just ends up looking like she has a shrunken head. Yeah, this figure just sucks. Like, I'm sorry. I wish there was a good April O'Neil figure, and they kept remaking this figure. Like, in almost every wave, they would make a redesign of the April O'Neil figure. Or, they'd start trying different types of Aprils after a while, but they never quite got out of it. It got better. I think by the time they did the one that came with the purple, like kind of magenta accessories, that was the best looking one. Her hair was a little more animated, her face was nicer, and they did a little bit of work to try to make her a little cooler. But I just think April, unfortunately, never really had a good figure. That's a shame. Also, her accessories were kind of uninteresting. They didn't really complement her very well. She wasn't good at holding all of them, and it was a cool idea to have the briefcase to be able to store some of the accessories in. And the hidden gun under the camcorder was a very cool idea, but it's just such a boring toy that you don't care about features like that with it because you're never going to play with it. I feel like April was probably a figure a lot of people didn't care about because they just kept remaking it because they wanted her to finally appeal to someone. And I just don't think she ever did. And that's a shame because April should have had a great figure. She's one of the biggest parts of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles lore. She is so important. And she deserves a good figure. But unfortunately, as much as I love the vintage line, I have to be honest, she never got one. Alright, now we're going to get into the Foot Clan. The villains. Now, I loved all characters in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles line, but I think the villains just shine. Usually villains are cooler than the heroes. They just have, the crazier, more extreme looking, grosser characters that are just always so much fun. And in this first set, we only got 4 villains, but we'd soon get many more. So first off, we have the leader of the Foot Clan, the Shredder, the main antagonist. Now in the cartoon show, he was big. He was like ripped, voiced by James Avery, Uncle Phil himself. He was this tough guy, he had the black sleeveless top, and he had the silver armor and the big purple cape, and it was just an iconic look. He looked awesome. Even though he was kind of just a goofball in the cartoon, he looked awesome. He looked very intimidating. In the original comic, he looked very intimidating. In the movie, he looked more intimidating than he ever did. But this action figure design for him is probably the worst Shredder design ever, if I'm going to be honest. Now, this is a figure my brother got when I was a kid. Most of the figures in the first wave were my brother's. So, I don't quite remember when he got this. But it was early on. I think he got it not from his birthday, but a birthday party. There was the birthday you'd spend with your family, where like the parents would give you gifts. But then there was, if you had friends, I don't know about that, but my brother had friends. So he would have birthday parties, at McDonald's or something, and all the kids from school would come and bring you a present. And there was one year early on, I think it was the first year, where we just got a ton of Ninja Turtles. He got, I think, Shredder, I think the Foot Soldier, some of the ones from set 2. I remember he got the Shredder at some point. And even as a kid, I just never even cared about this figure. Like, I didn't even register that I didn't like it. I just didn't care. I barely even noticed that it existed. Again, he has a cloth cape, much like the cloth garments on Splinter. And again, it's kind of awkward. It doesn't look that good. It's just a piece of cloth with a hole in it. It looks better than Splinter's, though. But the main thing that is weird about this figure, well, one of the things that's weird about this figure that I never got is, one, he's almost naked, which is He didn't dress like that in the cartoon, and he didn't dress like that in the comic either. In the comic, he was wearing colors much more accurate to actually what he wore in the 1990 film. So I don't get where this blue armor, naked Shredder came from. It's just such a weird figure. And he's like, don't get me wrong, he's ripped, but he's like skinny. He's like starving. Like you can see his spine coming out of his back. And on that note too, looking at his back, his muscles are weird. They're not like human muscle. He just has random shapes in random places. It's really weird because, you know, muscles on action figures were pretty well done at this point. And I know one of the guys who designed the first wave of figures for Turtles was one of the guys who worked on the Masters of the Universe line. So they should have had muscles down at that point. But I don't know. I feel like there's just something weird about the way Shredder's muscles look. And then his face, too. He doesn't look angry or intimidating. He looks like concerned. Like, he has this look on his face like, do you want to talk about it? Like, he came home from work and you were angry and he's trying to, like, comfort you. And it doesn't look intimidating at all. Then also add to the fact that they painted the top rim of his helmet like half the color of his skin and then painted these weird eyebrows on. Where I think that the figure actually would have looked much more intimidating and cool if they just made that whole rim blue, like his helmet, and made it look the way it's supposed to look, have most of his eyes covered, so it just looks like he's frowning. That would have looked much cooler. I also don't like this weird spell casting hand, like he's a D&D character and he's casting some spell on you. I never got what that was. I guess he's supposed to be like sending his army forward. Like, I don't know. It just looks like he's either striking a weird dance pose or he's casting a spell. It's really weird. And then the other hand looks like he's like scratching his chin, like he's thinking. It's like a very delicate hand. It's so weird. It's such a bad Shredder figure. I mean, I understand what they were going for. In the original comic, he was very tall and long. He was like he had some Jack Skellington body going on, like very tall and long. But he was also still like, buff and intimidating looking, where they just really missed the mark with Shredder. And yeah, I just think he's a pretty bad figure. We really never got a definitive good Shredder in this line. The Super Shredder figure's cool. Slice and Dice Shredder's probably the best one we got, but he's limited due to the weird action feature. So we never got like just a solid good Shredder. Now we're going to talk about my boys, Bebop and Rocksteady. Speaking of favorite fictional characters, ever since I was a kid, Bebop and Rocksteady have been two of my favorite characters from anything. These guys are just so much fun. They're goofy and funny and stupid. They're intimidating and cool looking. They're like hip, badass punks, but then they're also, tough, intimidating monsters, and they're lovable dopes. So it's like they're just likable on so many different levels. They're such a cool representation of like what was hip in the 80s. These guys just reek of 80s, and it's awesome. And early 90s, obviously. Bebop and Rocksteady are just so much fun. I was so disappointed when they disappeared for a while from the franchise, but I'm so happy that they're back in almost all forms of it now. These two figures are some of my favorite figures from the first wave. Let's start with Rocksteady. Rocksteady, as a kid, I always thought of as the one I liked more, but as I get older, I think I actually like Bebop more than Rocksteady. Bebop's design is just really cool. I like rhinoceroses more than warthogs. Rhinos are my favorite animals on the planet. I just think they're so cool looking, and I just have a lot of respect for them. But Bebop just has a really cool design. I think he has the more unique design, but I love both of them almost equally. It's hard for me to decide. One day I'll like Rocksteady better, the next day I'll like Bebop better. But Rocksteady, while he does have a very cool toy, he definitely didn't get as cool a toy as Bebop. The only thing I think is a little wrong with Rocksteady is the head to body ratio. He has this really long head, a little too long, could be a little shorter. But the thing that's weird is the body's a bit too small for it. Like, he's not as wide or stocky as Bebop is. So he's all around just not as big as Bebop. But in the cartoon show, Rocksteady's more stocky. He's actually the one with like a bit of a gut. And Bebop's just pure chiseled. And I mean, Bebop's pure chiseled in the toy as well. But he just has those broad shoulders and that football player stance. Whereas Rocksteady, like, yeah, he's a big dude. You wouldn't mess with this guy. But he's not quite as big as Bebop. And his body's a little too normal human proportioned for the giant rhinoceros head that he has. I would have rathered he have, bigger hands, like kind of like inhumanly big muscles, be wider. I'd be fine if he had a little bit of a gut, that'd be cool. And then just have big feet. But instead they gave him these like tiny feet and kind of tiny hands. The figure almost gets thinner and thinner as it goes down. Like the head is really big and then it just gets smaller and smaller as you go down. It's an odd choice for Rocksteady, and I think they definitely could have made him a little cooler. I do have to say, when the figure was blown up for the giant-sized ones, which we'll talk about in another video, the design worked a lot better. But anyway, it's still a cool figure. When I was a kid, this was one of the only soft head figures I had. I don't remember if any of the turtles I had were soft heads, but I know for a fact Rocksteady was a soft head, and let me explain what that means. Actually, all of the figures of the 4 turtles I have now, and Bebop and Rocksteady, I have soft heads for them. I have hard heads of the turtles and Bebop and Rocksteady in my carrying case and in my closet and stuff packed away. But I did get soft heads of all of them. And what that means is, originally in the line, they released all the characters with these softer kind of rubber heads, which was really the norm for action figures back then. Like, I know I keep jumping back to Masters of the Universe, but in that line, He-Man had a rubber head, Skeletor did, Man-at-Arms. They all had these soft plastic or rubber heads that were like a little smush. You could squeeze them. And all the Turtles figures were done in that style in the first wave at first too. But I think then once there was like a reissue for the figures, like once they blew up and all of them sold out and they reissued them, they were all released with hard heads then. I don't know if it was immediately the first reissue of them, but at some point early on, they replaced the soft heads with the hard heads. But I've gotten all the soft heads now. I kind of like the soft heads a little better, honestly, because while later in the line I like the hard heads, I do like the figure having a hard head better, but I like the paint on the soft heads better because it's sort of more vibrant and stands out more for some reason. But as far as consistency goes, I prefer the hard heads. But I remember having a soft head Rocksteady as a kid. And again, Rocksteady was my brother's. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe he was the first villain we got. We got him very early on. We had him for a long time. He was actually one of the longest, if not the longest surviving figure I had as a kid. I think by the end when I was, reaching the end of Turtle Mania, and a lot of my older figures were like damaged at that point and falling apart, Rocksteady was still in good shape. There was a point at the end there where my brother and I started to get a little bit of that, Sid from Toy Story kind of demon taking over us, where we started, like, killing our toys and doing weird things to our toys. Like, we'd pull their heads and arms and legs off and call them bowling balls and throw them at the rest of the toys and stuff. Like, we started really trashing our toys. But we had this excuse. We were like, well, they're all damaged and they're missing pieces and stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to start recollecting the line and we're going to buy new versions of all these characters where they have all the pieces and stuff. Though we didn't get at the time that a lot of these figures were a done deal by then. Like, they were out of stores. You weren't going to get Ace Duck new in a store in 1993. It's not gonna happen. Like, Ace Duck was a done deal at that point. So I remember we did actually trash Rocksteady at some point, which is a shame. I'm guessing he was missing like his belt and maybe some of his accessories, and that's really a shame. But I mean, my dad ended up throwing out our entire Ninja Turtles collection the next year at Thanksgiving when he was cleaning the basement anyway. So I guess it doesn't matter. They were all gonna end up in the trash anyway. But yeah, I really like the Rocksteady toy. Like I said, I have some issues with it, but it's a cool figure. I have some good memories with it. And I always liked the accessories he came with. The sewer lid for a shield was cool, and his gun was just awesome. But now we're going to talk about Bebop. Holy cow, what an awesome figure. Like, look at this dude. He has those big linebacker shoulder pads. He has those giant arms, those big hands. He has that cool, bright red jacket. He's got those black pants that are all stitched up and ripped up and stuff. He's got those hot kicks on his feet. He's got those cool shades, that purple mohawk. He's all hunched over in a battle stance. He's just awesome. I know a lot of people don't like the pink face on the figure. They wish he was all brown like in the cartoon show. But to be honest, I've actually always really liked the pink face. I think it looks more interesting. There's more detail on there. The dry brush is really nice. It brings out a lot of the warts and everything on his face. Whereas in the cartoon show, he was just kind of fluffy, where honestly, a warthog doesn't have an ultra fluffy face. I think he actually looks a lot cooler with the pink face. I like the change of tone. Like the closer you get to his nose, basically, the more pink it gets. I think that's a really cool look. Yeah, I really have no complaints about this figure. I think this is one of the best looking figures ever in the line. It's so cool. And again, his accessories are awesome. That like drill gun or laser gun, whatever it is. I always thought of it as a power drill. And even though he comes with a knife, I've always kind of had a problem with characters coming with more accessories than they can be displayed with. Like, they can't hold all of their accessories at once. You'd have to just lace them on the ground at their feet. That always kind of bugged me. It was a personal pet peeve of mine. And they did it a lot later in the line, but early on, usually characters could all hold their pieces. But my one answer to that I think works fine is you can very easily take Bebop's knife and Rocksteady's knife and plug them into the back of Rocksteady's belt. So Bebop and Rocksteady are a duo, so you can display them both holding their shields and their guns, and then have both of the knives in Rocksteady's belt. And that just works perfectly. I remember as a kid, I really liked the shininess of the black on his pants. I thought that was like just cool looking paint. But I have to say, I feel like it's gotten dulled over time because it doesn't have a crazy gloss to it now. I remembered it having like a high gloss as a kid. And for some reason, just like colors and textures on toys were very cool to me. Like, I loved back metal. I loved all kinds of effects like that on toys. Like, glossy paint looked cool. And I remember that black being very glossy. That's like a very strong memory for me. But it doesn't seem to be as glossy as I remember it. But yeah, awesome figure. Again, he was my brother's. He was actually one of the last ones we obtained from this line because first we borrowed him from one of my brother's friends for like a weekend or something. I remember us looking at him one morning and we were on a hill by the house and my dad was telling us to look out for snakes, which is weird because there aren't like a plethora of dangerous snakes in townhouse communities in New Jersey. But I don't know. But yeah, Bebop was awesome. And last of all, rounding out our first wave of figures is the Foot Soldier. These are just the, generic underlings of Shredder. In the cartoon series that ran alongside this, it was confirmed that they were robots. So that was kind of not only to avoid, violence and all, so now the turtles can hack them up into pieces with their sharp weapons, and there won't have to be gore or anything. But I think it was also a way of, not having to worry about humanizing the enemy. Like in the movie, it's a giant army of teenagers who are upset with their home lives, so they turn to crime, and the Foot Clan trains them, takes them in, and makes them foot soldiers. So that brings on a lot of emotional baggage, and that makes the foot soldiers more like victims rather than just armies of bad guys you gotta tear through. So I think that was some of the reason why they made them robots. And this is actually a very cool looking figure. It's a very odd figure. A lot of the figures in this first line had very unique, bizarre structures to them. I think over time they got more comfortable with a uniform build for figures, but in this first set they definitely experimented more with bizarre body builds and different types of joints for different characters, which we still see later in the line, but they did it much more frequently in the early line. But the figure looks very cool. It has this very evil look on its face. It almost has a head that looks like it's beaten up and bashed out of shape. And he has this hunchback, these very long arms. He has this kind of creepy look to him, almost like, you know, a scurrying monster or something, some skinny nightmare creature. And he came with very interesting accessories. I don't even know exactly what they are, some of them. They're just these big, weird, ripped up scraps of metal and stuff and contraptions. He came with a mace, but then he comes with this weird claw thing that you can wrap around his whole body. Now, what you were supposed to do with these was army build. And anyone who's into action figures understands what the term army build means. Very frequently, lines have villain underlings that you're just supposed to buy and buy and buy. Whether it be, you know, putty people from Power Rangers or foot soldiers from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The thing is, they cost full price. They cost the same price as any other figure. So it's quite expensive to army build. I've never been an army builder. Even as a kid, I never did it. I always wanted to. I always fantasized about having, you know, what they showed in the commercials, just a horde of foot soldiers. So you could just have your heroes just beat the crap out of them. But the idea was just my parents were never going to buy me the same figure like 20 times in a row. They wouldn't do that. In their eyes, like, oh, you have that one already. So I only really had the one foot soldier. I think we did end up with two eventually, or like the original one got destroyed and then we replaced it. But that was it. We never had a ton of foot soldiers. And even today, like the NECA 1990 film figures, I'm not gonna buy a ton of these $40 figures over and over again. Like, that's a bit too expensive to army build. And even today, if you want to buy the vintage one, I mean, cheapest you're gonna get them is probably like $10, probably missing some accessories. So you're gonna be spending like $100 or more if you want to get a decent collection of foot soldiers. It's worth noting that my foot soldier is actually not the original print. The rest of these are all vintage, but the foot soldier is the 2013 re-release of the figure that they did while the 2012 show was going on. So while I don't believe there's that many differences in the sculpt and the painting, the sculpt is the same, it's from the same mold, but a lot of the paint jobs were simpler at that time and some of the materials were a little weaker. So just bear that in mind, that this is a 2013 figure. I don't own a vintage foot soldier any longer, unfortunately. Now, the foot soldier was also my brother's because, you know, he owned most of these figures. Later in the line, it was more evenly split, but my brother always got more figures than me earlier on. I know he got him for, I believe, that birthday party where he got a bunch of figures. But the memory that stands out the most about the foot soldier is not actually with our own foot soldier. It was after we already had the foot soldier for years. I was in Pathmark with my mom, and I was little. I was like sitting in the seat on the cart, and she was pushing me down an aisle. And this was like a supermarket. This was like supermarket back in like the very early 90s or the very late 80s. I think it was like 1990. You know, back then you didn't see stuff like you do now. Like, you go to any store now and you just see, anywhere you look, toys of, you know, Disney princesses and Nintendo characters and Ninja Turtles and Batman, all this stuff. Like, you had to go to a toy store or go to a store that would specialize in something like that. Or, you know, go in like, you'd have to be in like the cereal aisle just to see those characters on boxes in a supermarket or something back then. You didn't walk into a supermarket down a random aisle of canned goods and just see an action figure there. But weirdly enough, there was a metal basket hanging on one of the shelves, just in a random aisle, and there was a fully sealed packaged foot soldier just sitting there. And I got so excited, because, you know, when you're not expecting to see something you love, and then you see it, as a kid, it like blows your mind. Like, say you're going someplace boring as a kid, your parents are making you go somewhere, and then suddenly you go there and you see your favorite characters or something there. It blows your mind. Like, it's the most exciting thing in the world. You were ready to be bored or just be in like a normal adult place, and here is your heroes and your obsession right here. The thing that you wished you were looking at is right here. And I remember seeing that, and I just remember being like, I was so excited, even though I already had a foot soldier. I didn't really care about getting another one. I wanted it so badly because it was just like seeing it in such a weird place just got me so excited. My mom was like, no, you have that one already. You're not getting it. We don't have the money for toys and stuff. So I was disappointed. And I still don't really know why it was there, because they didn't carry Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle toys to the best of my knowledge. They didn't carry action figures at all. They were Pathmark. I mean, you go there to buy like peaches and ground beef and paper towels. Like, you know, you don't go there to buy action figures. So it was just weird. Like, they didn't even have a toy aisle back then. Now supermarkets all have like a little tiny toy aisle. But back then they didn't have that. So I don't really know what that was doing there. That might have even been a case of another kid had it. Say another kid was in a shopping cart and their parents had just bought them that at, you know, a Toys R Us or something. And he might have been playing and left it in there, and the parents didn't realize and just pushed the cart away, and the toy just ended up sitting there. So I don't even know if it was a product they were selling. But yeah, I don't know why. It's actually not much of a noteworthy story, but for some reason that just always sticks in my head. I just always thought it was crazy, and I don't know. I'm probably thinking this is a lot more interesting than it really is. You're probably like, all right, what the hell's your point? But all in all, the Foot Soldier's a pretty cool figure. It's not my favorite figure in the first wave, but it's definitely a lot cooler than it needed to be. It's just a Foot Soldier. So they went all out with the Foot Soldier, and I appreciate that. And that wraps up year one of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Vintage Toy Line by Playmates Toys. We're going to go over all the different waves they did, but this is the one that started it all. So let's rank these guys now. We're going to rank them from my favorite to my least favorite. I'd say easily, without a doubt, number one goes to Bebop. That's just the perfect figure. Number two, I would say, goes to Donatello. He's my favorite of the Turtles figures. Number three would be Michelangelo. I just love the colors on him, and, you know, I just really liked this figure as a kid. Number four, I would say, is Rocksteady. He has a little bit of problems, but overall, it's just an awesome sculpt, classic figure. Number five, I would say, is Leonardo. Just have a lot of history with this figure. Number six, Foot Soldier. Way cooler than it needed to be. Number seven is Raphael. Awesome figure, but my least favorite of the four turtle figures, but still awesome. Then we get into the territory where they're not so good. I would say number 8 is Shredder, number 9 is Splinter, and number 10 at the very bottom is April O'Neil, because that's just a horrible figure. So those are my thoughts on year 1 of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles toy line. Come back next time and we'll talk about Wave 2 with Baxter Stockman, General Trag, and all those guys. Take care.